A battered pickup truck skids to a stop, snow and mud flying through the frigid Iowa air. Out steps Jonas Fletcher, a rugged Vietnam veteran and lifelong farmer on the brink of losing his family's land to ruthless banks and corporate greed. On that same icy road stands a woman, her expensive sedan stalled, the hood steaming in defeat. Little does Jonas know, he's just rescued Evelyn Harrington, the billionaire heiress to America's largest auto empire. This chance meeting will ignite an explosive story filled with courage, unexpected alliances, and a desperate fight to preserve the American farmer's way of life. Will Jonas reclaim his legacy, or will corporate power destroy everything he fought to protect? Stick around until the end. You won't believe the twist awaiting you. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell icon, and join us as we tell powerful stories that honor heroes, celebrate resilience, and bring back memories of classic American grit. Jonas Fletcher was 67, but he felt a century old as he trudged across the frozen mud of his farm in Willow Glen County. Once, this land had been his pride, a legacy nurtured through generations of Fletchers ever since his great-grandfather built the first barn on a hill overlooking the valley. Now it felt more like a debt-ridden husk of its former glory. The bitter December wind stung his cheeks as he paused to catch his breath, leaning on a fence post that had seen better days. He had served in Vietnam decades ago, fought for his country, then returned to this parcel of dirt and grass, determined to raise a family and continue the lineage. For a while it worked, Jonas married his sweetheart, Claire, and poured his soul into each harvest. They had a daughter, Lily, who grew up climbing trees in the backyard and feeding the goats by hand. But tragedy struck the family like a sudden storm. Claire fell gravely ill, and within a year, Jonas lost the love of his life to cancer. Lily moved to another state soon after, trying to escape the sadness that clung to the farm like a perpetual fog. In the meantime, Jonas stayed behind, determined, perhaps stubbornly so, to keep the farm afloat despite bank notices and merciless crop failures. Over the years, his nights had grown unbearably quiet. No squeak of a rocking chair beside him, no kind laughter from the kitchen. He often found himself standing in the living room, gazing at the old photographs of Claire in her Sunday dress and Lily as a toddler perched on his knee. Each snapshot was a testament to a life that felt increasingly distant. Whenever the memory of war returned, hot nights in a far-off jungle, bullets whizzing by, Jonas would close his eyes and recall how Claire's embrace had grounded him. But now, with her gone, he braved each day alone, drifting into a routine of solitude and hard work that never seemed to pay off. His battered pickup truck was a 1982 model, still running through sheer force of Jonas's will. It rattled and growled like an old soldier with too many injuries, refusing to die. Jonas was proud of that truck. He'd spent countless hours under its hood, swapping out hoses and belts, patching it with duct tape and borrowed parts. Yet even with all his mechanical know-how, the battered irrigation system on his farm had proven a tougher adversary. Another pipe had burst last week, flooding the north field and causing thousands of dollars in damage he couldn't afford. The bank had called again yesterday, someone named Holcomb from the acquisitions department, asking if Jonas would consider selling. He'd ended the conversation curtly and thrown his phone onto the table. The notion of letting go of his land felt like a betrayal to the generations before him, but deep down, he wondered how much more he could endure. That night, he prayed for a miracle the way only a man who has lost everything can pray. Kneeling by the worn-out recliner he used as a bed, Jonas bowed his head and whispered a plea into the stillness. He wasn't sure if God was listening, but he hoped some grace might drift across his fields like a gentle morning fog, bringing salvation where he saw only ruin. Little did he suspect that salvation might come in the form of a stranded stranger on a lonely county road, and that everything he clung to would soon be turned upside down. A frigid dawn broke over Willow Glen County the next day, with pale sunlight illuminating the winding back roads. Jonas was driving his old pickup toward the co-op market, where he hoped to find a discounted pipe replacement, when he spotted a glossy black sedan parked askew on the gravel shoulder. It wasn't just any sedan, brand new, sleek lines, tinted windows, and a distinctive silver emblem he'd only seen in car magazines. The front hood was open, and a woman stood nearby, pacing in frustration with her cell phone pressed to her ear. She wore a tailored wool coat, the color of midnight, and high-heeled boots completely impractical for the muddy roadside. Jonas slowed the truck, unsure at first whether to help. His instincts told him folks around here often pitched in when someone was in trouble, but he also had a lifetime of wariness about strangers, especially ones who appeared to hail from a different world entirely. The woman noticed him, relief flickering across her face. Jonas pulled over, the pickup's engine sputtering in protest as he stepped out. "Morning," he said gruffly, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Car trouble," she ended her call, eyes darting from the battered truck to Jonas's weathered face. "Yes," she replied, exhaling a frosty breath. "Something's wrong with the engine. I think." The battery light came on, and then everything just stopped. Her accent was neutral, her tone polite yet tense. Jonas approached the open hood, scanning for obvious issues. He'd worked on enough engines in his time to suspect the alternator or battery might be the culprit, but this was no ordinary car. The mass of plastic covers and specialized parts made his old truck's engine look like a dinosaur. He glanced at her again. "I might not be able to do much on the roadside." "Ms. Call me Evelyn," she interjected, noticing his hesitation. "Evelyn Caldwell." Jonas raised an eyebrow at the name, but let it pass. "Jonas Fletcher." He offered. "I live a few miles up that way." He gestured vaguely toward farmland. "I can tow your car back if you need, or give you a lift into town. There's a garage, though it might not stock parts for a car like yours." Evelyn bit her lip. "If you could just help me get somewhere safe, that'd be great. My phone's almost dead, and I'm not exactly dressed to hike." Jonas gave a wry chuckle. "No, ma'am, you're not." He fetched a chain and hooked it up beneath the car's front bumper, carefully avoiding damaging the sleek exterior. While he worked, Evelyn glanced around the desolate landscape, leafless trees, frosty fields, and a sky the color of lead. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked. He shrugged. "Quieter these days. Used to be more farms, more people." She nodded, sliding into her car to steer while Jonas eased his truck forward, gently pulling her vehicle along. It was a slow, bumpy process down the back road, the chain clanking against gravel. Evelyn watched Jonas through her rearview mirror with cautious curiosity, as if he were an artifact from another era. For his part, Jonas felt an odd mix of protectiveness and apprehension, a sleek city car stranded on his territory, and a woman who seemed out of place. Both might just complicate a life already on the brink of collapse. He sighed, setting his jaw. Sometimes good deeds had a price, but he couldn't turn away. This was how folks in Willow Glen were raised, no matter how worn down you felt. You never abandoned someone in trouble. By the time Jonas managed to tow Evelyn's car the last mile, the sky had brightened to a dull gray. They arrived at his property, a sprawling stretch of farmland dotted with old oaks. The main house, a modest two-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, sat at the end of a gravel driveway. Several broken fence posts lined the property boundary, and beyond them were acres of fields lying dormant for winter. As Jonas unhooked the chain, Evelyn stepped out of her sedan, wincing when her heels sank into the muddy ground. "You can leave your car right there," Jonas said, "and I'll see if I can call up the nearest garage. But, fair warning, it's a small operation. Might take 'em a day or two to get the parts you need." Evelyn pulled her coat tighter. "Thank you. I didn't expect to get stranded like this. I was just traveling through, and the GPS directed me off the main highway." Jonas motioned for her to follow him inside the house, explaining that it was warmer there. The interior was sparsely decorated. A threadbare rug lay across the living room floor, and a dated recliner faced an old television set. On the mantel stood a few framed photos, a younger Jonas in uniform, medals pinned to his chest, a smiling woman with warm eyes Claire by his side, and a teenage girl in pigtails. Evelyn took in these details with subtle fascination, sensing the presence of family stories left half told. "Let me check if the landline still works," Jonas said, disappearing into the kitchen. Evelyn stood awkwardly in the living room, noticing the silence beyond the ticking clock on the wall. This house felt suspended in time, holding on to echoes of memories that were all but vanished. She was used to the hum of city life conference calls, the clack of heels on marble floors, the glow of skyscrapers. Here, Mom, there was only the faint whistle of wind against old windows. After a minute, Jonas returned, grimacing. Phone's out again. Storm must have knocked something loose. I've been meaning to fix it. He hesitated. Might be best if you stay here till morning. The roads aren't great, and you won't find a hotel for miles. Not sure you'd want to, anyway. Town's got only one little motel. Evelyn glanced outside, spotting the sky thickening with a fresh wave of gray clouds. A flicker of concern crossed her features. But Jonas's expression, stony yet kind, reassured her that he wasn't some threat. All right, she agreed, removing her coat, but let me pay you for the trouble. I don't want to impose. He shook his head firmly. Not necessary. If you're hungry, I can whip up something. Got some beans, maybe a bit of ham left. She offered a small, grateful smile. That would be wonderful. While Jonas busied himself in the kitchen, Evelyn walked around to study the photos more closely. She paused at the one with Jonas and Claire, picking it up. A heavy pang of emotion tugged at her chest, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the wistfulness in Jonas's gaze that morning, or the quiet sadness that permeated this old farmhouse. She replaced the photo gently, noting how the edges of the frame were worn from years of being held. Deep down, she felt an odd mixture of curiosity and compassion for the man who'd rescued her. She also felt a pang of guilt for not revealing her true identity, especially given that she recognized his battered pickup truck might be the sort of thing her company, Caldwell Motors, rarely designed for. But for now, it was best to keep her secrets until she understood just how deeply Jonas Fletcher's story would intertwine with her own. Snow began to fall by late afternoon, thin flakes swirling in gusts against the windows. Jonas stoked the living room's wood-burning stove, occasionally glancing at Evelyn, who sipped tea from a chipped ceramic mug. The meal had been simple canned beans, toasted bread, a few slices of ham he'd salvaged from last week's groceries. She hadn't complained, which impressed him more than he cared to admit. Earlier, they tried to fix the landline without success. Even if Jonas had managed to get it running, the local garage might be closed until morning. He'd lent Evelyn an old, oversized sweater and a pair of wool socks that dwarfed her feet. The incongruity made him smile. She moved around the living room, studying the old war medals displayed in a glass case near the bookshelf. Those from Vietnam, she asked softly, her voice respectful. Jonas nodded. I was drafted in '69, served 2 tours, came home in '71, sometimes feels like another lifetime. She pursed her lips thoughtfully. My father, well, he once told me about that war, said it changed this country forever. Jonas inhaled sharply. Her father, she hadn't mentioned much about her family, but he let it pass, focusing on the swirling snow outside. It sure did, he murmured. Then, in a rare moment of openness, he added, I came back with a few scars, some you can't see. Evelyn placed the metal case back carefully. We all carry invisible wounds. I think a short silence fell between them, broken only by the pop of wood in the stove. Jonas studied her, his uninvited guest who seemed so polished, yet oddly vulnerable. She carried herself like someone used to giving orders, or at least navigating rooms full of high-powered personalities. But here she was, stranded in a rundown farmhouse, warming her hands by a sputtering stove. You said your name's Caldwell, Jonas asked, trying to break the tension. She nodded. Yes, Evelyn Caldwell. Family local, she shook her head. No, they're based in Detroit. Jonas seemed about to pry further, but stopped himself. Everyone had their secrets, and it wasn't his place to dig if she didn't want to share. You're welcome to the spare bedroom, he offered. Standing up, don't mind the boxes. I've been clearing out some of my wife's old things. His voice grew softer at that admission. Evelyn rose as well, stepping closer. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, and the genuine sympathy in her eyes disarmed him. He nodded, swallowing hard. Thank you, it was cancer, years back now. She was my anchor. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jonas turned away, leading her down the hall to a small room filled with dusty boxes and an old dresser. A narrow bed lay against the wall, covered by a faded quilt. Here, he said, flipping on a lamp that cast a weak yellow glow. Heat's not great, but the quilts are warm. If you need anything, I'll be in the living room. She set her mug on the dresser. Thank you, Jonas. I really appreciate your kindness. He nodded and left quickly, heart pounding with a mixture of awkwardness and something else he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the realization that, despite his hermit-like existence, he found himself wanting to learn more about this mysterious woman. He wondered if he'd regret opening his door so readily. But that was the way of Willow Glen people helped each other. Come what may, outside the snowfall thickened, blanketing the fields in a pristine layer of white. Inside, Jonas stared at the flickering stove, haunted by memories of Claire and the slow demise of his once proud farm. He didn't know it yet, but tonight was the quiet before the storm. Forces beyond his understanding were already in motion, and Evelyn Caldwell was the catalyst who would soon shake the foundations of his life, both for better and for worse. Jonas woke at dawn, stiff from another night spent in his recliner. A dull ache spread across his lower back as he rose, dropping a couple more logs into the stove. The snowstorm had left a sparkling sheen over everything outside. He wondered if the roads would be passable enough to reach the garage today. As he glanced toward the hallway, he saw Evelyn's door slightly ajar. She emerged moments later, hair slightly mussed, the borrowed sweater slipping off one shoulder. "Morning," she said, voice husky from sleep. "I hope you don't mind. I found some coffee in the kitchen." Jonas grunted with a half smile. "Help yourself. Don't get too excited, though it's instant." They shared a quiet breakfast of black coffee and leftover toast. The awkwardness of being near strangers manifested in hesitant smiles and polite nods. After tidying up, Jonas offered to see if he could get her car running enough to drive it into town, but Evelyn hesitated. "I'd appreciate that," she said, "but before we go, could I walk around the farm a bit? I'd like to stretch my legs." Jonas was surprised. Most visitors, especially outsiders from more urban backgrounds, weren't exactly eager to trudge through snow and mud, but he agreed. He grabbed a second coat for her from the closet, an old one that belonged to Claire, though he didn't mention that, and they headed out. Boots crunching over fresh snow. The morning sky was clear, a crisp blue overhead. As they walked, Jonas pointed out the different sections of his land, the North Field, where he grew corn in the warmer seasons, the battered irrigation system that snaked along a shallow ravine, the dilapidated barn that had once housed cows back when he was younger and more ambitious. Evelyn took everything in with keen interest, stopping frequently to run her hand along a worn fence or peer at the equipment. "Your irrigation system seems old," she remarked, crouching by a rusted pipe. "When's the last time you replaced any of this?" Jonas snorted. "Replaced, more like patched and prayed. I don't have the funds to overhaul it. Bank's been on me to sell, but He trailed off, jaw tightening at the thought of losing this place. Evelyn nodded, empathy in her gaze. "If you did have the money, would you modernize it? Maybe switch to a pivot system or drip irrigation?" He blinked, surprised at her knowledge. "Yeah, or bury some new lines. But that's tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. This farm doesn't generate that kind of cash these days." They reached the barn, and Jonas swung open the large doors. The interior smelled of hay and damp wood. Old tools were stacked in a corner, remnants of the farm's more prosperous times. Evelyn ran her fingers over a broken plow, then turned to Jonas. "You ever think about other ways to save this place?" she asked gently. He shrugged. "I've tried loans, side jobs, renting out parts of the land. Nothing stuck. I'm not a young man anymore. It's hard to keep dreaming." A flicker of something passed over Evelyn's face, pity, or perhaps respect. She took a step closer. "For what it's worth," she said, voice quiet, "I admire that you've held on so long." Jonas met her gaze. For the first time, he felt like someone was actually seeing the years of toil etched into his hands, the grief in his eyes, the loyalty anchoring him to this farm. But what he didn't yet grasp was that Evelyn Caldwell had come to Willow Glen with more than just passing curiosity. Within the next few days, she would reveal exactly why she seemed to know so much about irrigation systems and industrial machinery, and the truth would rock Jonas Fletcher to his core. They spent the rest of the morning in the barn, tinkering with Jonas's old tractor and exploring tools he hadn't touched in years. Evelyn asked a dozen questions about how Jonas kept his farm vehicles running, delving into everything from spare parts sourcing to homemade fixes. He answered patiently, occasionally impressed by the pointed nature of her inquiries. When lunchtime approached, they trudged back to the house, cheeks flushed from the cold. Jonas rummaged through his nearly empty pantry, producing a can of soup and some crackers. Evelyn didn't complain about the meager fare. In fact, she seemed more concerned about whether he was eating enough herself. Over steaming bowls, Jonas explained he had often skipped meals to save money. She looked stricken but said nothing, clearly wrestling with her own thoughts. Once they finished, Jonas suggested they try to see if her fancy car would at least turn over. In daylight, the machine looked even more out of place, sleek lines caked in mud, glinting metallic paint contrasting the humble surroundings. Jonas popped the hood, rummaged around with his multimeter, and confirmed his suspicion the alternator was shot. The battery, drained, would barely hold a charge. Evelyn stood behind him, her arms folded against the cold. "Is it fixable?" she asked quietly. "Maybe, but it'll take parts we won't find around here easily." Jonas closed the hood. "We'll have to tow it to the garage in town. See if Milt the mechanic can order what you need." She sighed, a mixture of exasperation and resignation crossing her face. "All right, let's do it." It took an hour for them to secure her sedan to Jonas's truck and navigate the icy back roads into Willow Glen's tiny downtown. The town comprised a single main street lined with a handful of shops, a barber, a diner, the co-op, and a small hardware store. Milt's garage sat at the far end, its sign peeling, the interior cluttered with half-disassembled engines and oil drum. Milt, a barrel-chested man in his 70s, greeted Jonas warmly, ignoring Evelyn's city clothes as if by long habit. "Well, if it isn't Jonas Fletcher," he said with a toothy grin. "What contraption you bringing me now?" Jonas grunted. "Wish it was my truck, but it's her car." He gestured to Evelyn. "It's fancy. Milt. So I'll bet we'll need to do a special order." Milt scratched his chin, peered under the hood. "Yep, that's a Caldwell Motors piece of machinery. Top of the line." He shook his head. "I can order an alternator. Might take a few days if the warehouse doesn't have it in state." Evelyn winced, but she nodded. "Do it, please. And, well, I guess I'll have to stick around until then." Jonas expected a protest, some annoyance at the delay. Instead, Evelyn seemed almost calm, as though she had anticipated or accepted that fate would strand her here longer than planned. When Milt ducked inside to check parts availability, Jonas caught Evelyn glancing at the Caldwell Motors logo etched into the engine block, her eyes reflecting a complicated emotion he couldn't decipher. On their way back out of town, Jonas stopped at the co-op to grab feed for the goats. Evelyn tagged along, and to his surprise, she struck up a friendly conversation with the store clerk, asking about local produce and the town's history. Jonas watched, faintly amused. Perhaps this city woman was more adaptable than he thought. He just couldn't shake the notion that there was something she wasn't telling him, some piece of her story that explained why she was so comfortable discussing everything from engine layouts to farmland viability. Little did he know, the revelation would come sooner rather than later, and it would challenge his trust in ways he never expected. That evening, a biting wind rattled the house as Jonas secured a spare set of blankets for Evelyn's makeshift guest room. After another humble meal, this time scrambled eggs and canned tomatoes, he noticed how quiet she'd become. She stood by the window, staring out into the darkness of the countryside, lost in thought. The glow from a small lamp fell across her features, revealing a mix of worry and regret. He approached, clearing his throat softly. "You all right?" Evelyn turned, offering a small smile. Just thinking about everything I'm missing back home, I guess. Meetings, obligations. My family will be wondering where I am. Jonas nodded. You can use my cell phone if you need. Service is spotty, but it might work. She hesitated before accepting. After several attempts, she managed to connect to a call, stepping into the hallway to speak in hushed tone. Jonas busied himself cleaning the dishes, but he couldn't help eavesdropping on the muffled conversation. He picked up fragments. Delay. Yes, I know. We'll finalize. Not sure when. The tension in her voice was palpable. When she returned, she seemed more guarded, her eyes darting around as though she suspected Jonas might have overheard. Thanks, she said stiffly. Returning the phone. No luck with the signal. I left a voicemail, at least. An uneasy silence hung in the air. Jonas decided to break it by suggesting they retire early. Before heading to his recliner, he placed a few logs in the stove, ensuring the house would stay reasonably warm overnight. Evelyn lingered, glancing from the flickering flames to Jonas as though she wanted to say something but lacked the words. He sensed her internal turmoil but gave her space. Everyone in Willow Glen had their own burdens, and it wasn't his habit to pry. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn Caldwell was torn between two worlds, one she had carefully built, and another she hadn't expected to discover. In the deep of night, Jonas found himself tossing and turning, thoughts drifting to the bank notices on the kitchen counter. The weight of potential foreclosure pressed heavily on his mind. Then he imagined Evelyn in the spare room, curled up under old quilts, perhaps restless from the same restlessness that had plagued him for years. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves. He tried to pray again, but words failed him. Instead, he found himself remembering Claire's voice, her gentle admonishments to keep believing in miracles. A single kind deed can ripple across a lifetime, she used to say. Had Jonas's decision to help Evelyn been the kind of action Claire might have applauded? Possibly. But could that kindness also upend everything he thought he knew about his life, drifting in and out of uneasy dreams? Jonas saw visions of his younger self, kneeling in a Vietnamese rice paddy under gunfire, wishing he could be home, safe in Willow Glen. Now, decades later, the war inside him was different: financial ruin, lingering grief, an empty house echoing with regrets. But sometimes new battles brought unexpected allies. Even in the darkness of the farmhouse, something told Jonas that the stranger he'd welcomed in might be the key to a salvation he no longer dared to hope for. The following day dawned cold and bright. Jonas woke early, determined to fix a section of his irrigation pipe before the afternoon freeze set in. Evelyn insisted on accompanying him, despite his protests that she should stay warm in the house. Bundled in layers, she followed him to the east field, where a tangle of corroded joints and cracked PVC awaited repair. Jonas knelt in the snow, prying at a stubborn clamp with a screwdriver, while Evelyn observed closely. "Tell me how this happened," she said, crouching beside him. "Storm damage? Bad installation? Old age, take your pick." Jonas gritted his teeth as the clamp finally gave way. "I've patched this thing so many times. It's a wonder it still holds water." Evelyn frowned, scanning the network of pipes. "If you had a modern pivot system, or even partial drip lines, you wouldn't be dealing with half these issues." He paused, peering at her. "You sure know a lot about farming methods." She glanced away. "I've read up on it. Different forms of irrigation, sustainable methods. It's an interest of mine," Jonas huffed in amusement. "And here I thought you were some corporate lawyer or something." She froze for a second, then forced a chuckle. "I get that a lot." Silence settled between them, broken only by Jonas's grunts as he tightened a makeshift fitting. Once finished, he tried to start the water flow from the nearby well pump, only to be met with a hiss and trickle. Frustrated, he slapped the side of the ancient pump. Damn it, probably rusted. Evelyn stood up, brushing snow from her knees. "Let me help." Without waiting for permission, she joined him at the pump, fiddling with the valves. "Careful, these hoses can burst under pressure," Jonas warned. She gave him a nod, adjusting the main valve gently. "Here, ease it forward too much." and you'll get backflow. His eyebrows shot up. How do you... But before he could finish, water sputtered, then burst through the patch, spraying them both in a cold, narrow jet. Evelyn yelped as Jonas lunged to shut it off. In seconds, they were drenched, laughing in spite of themselves at the ridiculousness of the situation. Panting from the exertion, Jonas wiped water from his face. Well, you tried. Evelyn wrung out a sleeve, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. We'll just have to do better next time. Their laughter faded as they stood close, hearts pounding. Jonas felt a momentary rush of warmth that had nothing to do with physical proximity. She wasn't just a stranded city driver anymore. She was someone who wanted to roll up her sleeves, who shared frustrations over broken machinery, who could find humor in a sudden burst of freezing water. Something in Jonas's chest stirred a faint echo of companionship he hadn't felt since Claire. Before they could linger in that feeling, a shout rang out behind them. Jonas turned to see his neighbor, Harold Gunderson, flagging them down. Jonas Harold Holloward, need you to come quick. The county inspector's here, and he's asking about overdue property taxes. With a ragged sigh, Jonas signaled his understanding. He muttered an apology to Evelyn and trudged off, worry lines creasing his forehead anew. She followed close behind, glimpsing the tension in his shoulders. In that moment, it became painfully clear that Jonas was fighting not just mechanical breakdowns, but a bureaucratic system that seemed eager to swallow his farm whole. Little did either of them realize. Harold's news was just the tip of an iceberg, and soon, a much larger revelation would thrust them into a deeper conflict, forcing Evelyn to reveal who she really was. By the time Jonas reached the front porch, he found a county official with a clipboard flipping through pages, barely acknowledging the old farm dog barking at his heels. Harold stood nearby, arms crossed in solidarity. When the inspector looked up and saw Jonas, he tapped a line on his clipboard. Mr. Fletcher, we've attempted to contact you about overdue property taxes. You're at risk of a lien if payment isn't made soon. Jonas's shoulders sagged. Another blow. Another set of fees he couldn't afford. I'm trying to get the money, he said through gritted teeth, voice trembling with frustration. Just need more time. The inspector offered a perfunctory nod. We can grant a 30-day extension. But after that, his tone indicated the obvious outcome. He handed Jonas a paper, then headed back to his county-issued sedan, leaving behind an air of doom. Harold spat into the snow as the car drove off. That's the last thing you need right now, Jonas. Yeah, Jonas mumbled. I'll figure something out. Evelyn stood behind him, watching with mounting concern. Harold shot her a curious glance before tipping his cap. Ma'am, you must be the one Jonas was talking about. Car trouble, right? She nodded politely. Yes, sir. Evelyn Caldwell. Harold gave a polite shrug. Well, welcome to Willow Glen, I suppose. Ain't much, but some of us still call it home. With a pat on Jonas's shoulder, he excused himself. Call me if you need anything. This farm's important to us. Jonas, you know that. As Harold disappeared around the bend, Jonas turned to Evelyn, noticing her expression of heartfelt sympathy. He muttered an embarrassed apology. Didn't mean for you to get dragged into my troubles. Evelyn shook her head. Don't apologize. I'm sorry you're dealing with so much. She lifted the county notice from his hand. Is it as bad as it looks? Jonas let out a long breath. Worse. Between the property taxes, the mortgage, and the failing equipment, I'm nearly underwater. A big corporation, Redwood Holdings, has been sniffing around, offering to buy the farm. He cast a bleak gaze across the snow-laden fields. I swore I'd never sell. It's been in my family for generations. But I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Evelyn's eyes flashed with something that looked like resolve. She opened her mouth, then closed it, struggling with an internal debate. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight. Jonas, there's something I should tell you. He frowned, curious but wary. Okay. Before she could continue, a horn sounded from the driveway. Milt's tow truck rumbled in, hauling a battered old generator Jonas had asked him to look at weeks ago. The moment shattered the gravity of Evelyn's confession. She swallowed and shoved her hands into her coat pockets. Let's talk later. Jonas nodded, though a kernel of suspicion took root in his mind. He thanked Milt, who unloaded the generator. They chatted briefly about parts for Evelyn's car before Milt headed back to town. Once he was gone, the farm felt colder than ever, the winter gloom settling in. Throughout the rest of the day, Jonas noticed Evelyn's pensive demeanor, as if a storm brewed inside her. She helped where she could, covering the goats in extra straw, hauling hay to the lean-to, even assisting with the broken generator, but her gaze kept straying to the horizon. Jonas wondered what she was hiding. He sensed a tipping point. One more jolt, and her secrets might spill out, for better or worse. Night came swiftly, a deep chill setting in. Jonas prepared a modest supper: potatoes fried in a cast-iron skillet with onions and a sprinkle of salt. He watched Evelyn push the food around on her plate, her earlier appetite dimmed by worry. His own stomach twisted in knots at the thought of the looming tax deadline. Jonas, she began, her voice quavering slightly. We need to talk. Really talk. He set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, trying to mask the apprehension tightening his chest. All right, she took a slow breath. My name is Evelyn Caldwell. Yes, but there's more to it. My father is Lawrence Caldwell, the founder of Caldwell Motors. I'm not just some random driver who wandered off the highway. Jonas stared at her. The name Caldwell Motors carried weight, one of the country's largest automotive manufacturers, known for luxury sedans, electric vehicles, and a global reach. Her sedan's brand suddenly clicked in his mind. You're part of that Caldwell family. She nodded. I'm the vice president of research and development. I came here on a sort of covert trip to understand how rural communities might benefit from a new line of vehicles we're calling the Legacy line. Vehicles designed for durability, ease of maintenance, things that big farms and small towns alike could really use. I wanted to see real conditions, talk to real people. That's why I was on that back road. I was surveying potential sites, not expecting to break down. Jonas let out a slow whistle, shock reverberating through him. The fragments of her knowledge about irrigation, mechanical systems, even her calm acceptance of her sedan's breakdown, all of it made sense now. But it also meant she'd deceived him. So you've been using me for research, he asked quietly, trying to keep the betrayal out of his voice. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with regret. No, at least, not like that. I truly did break down, and I really did appreciate your help. Everything I've seen here, everything about you and your farm, it's changed me. I just wasn't sure how to tell you once I realized how complicated it might become. I'm sorry. Jonas ran a hand across his stubble, processing the bombshell. Anger flared momentarily, but it was tempered by the reality that she'd never outright lied, just omitted a monumental piece of information. So, what does this mean? You want to buy my land for some facility? Evelyn shook her head vigorously. No, that's Redwood Holdings, not us. Our approach is different. I want Caldwell Motors to partner with rural farmers for pilot programs testing the vehicles where they matter most. And your farm, I see a place where we could demonstrate that if we fix real problems, like your irrigation or your battered equipment, maybe we can do the same for other communities. Jonas felt the weight of her words, the possibility of salvation, but he also felt cornered. So, you want to swoop in and rescue me? Is that it? She flinched. Jonas, I don't want to swoop in. I want to help, yes, but I'm also drawn to this place, to you. The resilience I've seen here is what we at Caldwell Motors have lost. We've been designing sleek, disposable cars for wealthy clients. But I believe in something else, something more sustainable. Tension thrummed between them like a taut string, ready to snap. Jonas stared into Evelyn's earnest eyes, torn between gratitude and indignation. Could he trust her? Was she truly here to help? Or was this just another corporate maneuver? And beneath it all, another emotion brewed, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The following morning, Jonas was out by the barn before first light, mind swirling with conflicted thoughts. He'd barely slept, replaying Evelyn's confession until exhaustion overcame him. Now, in the crisp, pre-dawn air, he tried to clear his head by hauling hay and checking on the goats. But as he tossed bales into the pen, he heard the crunch of boots on frozen ground behind him. He turned to see Evelyn, bundled in the coat he'd loaned her. She appeared resolute, yet a bit hesitant. "I know last night was a lot," she began, voice soft. "Can we talk more?" Jonas leaned against the barn wall, crossing his arms. "I suppose." She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. "What I didn't say is that Caldwell Motors is on the brink of a big internal shift. My father's stepping down, and the board wants to double down on luxury markets. But I've been pushing for something else, this legacy line idea. Trucks and SUVs that could last decades, built with modular parts so farmers can fix them without a specialized computer." She paused, assessing his reaction. "We got pushback. The board said we didn't understand the real market. That's why I came here, incognito. I needed real data, real stories." Jonas frowned, glancing out at the barren fields. "So you're basically doing field research for some corporate pitch." "I was," Evelyn admitted, "but it became more when I met you." "Your story. This farm, it's exactly what I've been trying to fight for at Caldwell Motors. A place where vehicles are more than status symbols. They're tools that help people survive and thrive." He studied the hay at his feet. "I won't lie, I need the help. I'm drowning in debt. The irrigation is shot, and Redwood Holdings hounds me every week. But how do I know you won't just cut me loose once you get your data?" A flash of hurt crossed her features. "You don't. But I promise you, I have no intention of abandoning Willow Glen. Jonas, if you let me, I'd like to propose a formal partnership to the board, turn your farm into a pilot test site for the legacy line. Caldwell Motors would fund an irrigation overhaul and provide new machinery prototypes in exchange for your honest feedback and real-world data." Jonas exhaled, relief mingled with fear. That sounded almost too good to be true. "What's the catch?" She managed a small smile. "Caldwell Motors invest in your farm's infrastructure. You sign a contract agreeing to test and review each prototype. We'll come out here, run trials, gather feedback. You'd also attend some corporate meetings, speak about your experiences. It'll be a bit of media spectacle. I won't lie, but it's not a sale. This land stays yours." Silence stretched as Jonas mulled over the enormity of the proposition. It felt like a lifeline, yet a lifetime of caution, combined with the heartbreak he'd endured, held him back. "What about Redwood Holdings?" he finally asked. "They want to buy me out. If they find out Caldwell is involved, they might pressure the county to shut me down." Evelyn straightened her posture, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "Caldwell Motors has resources. If Redwood tries anything, we'll fight them legally. They won't bully you under my watch." A rooster crowed in the distance, punctuating the moment. Jonas stared at Evelyn, half convinced he was still dreaming. She was offering a path to save his farm and restore dignity to a life battered by loss. But trusting someone meant risking more heartache. Could he take that leap? The old scars on his soul cautioned him to remain guarded, yet the stubborn spark inside him yearned to grab this chance before it slipped away. Evelyn spent the next few hours drafting a preliminary agreement on Jonas's old laptop. She sat at the kitchen table, the warm light of mid-morning flooding through the window. Jonas hovered nearby, arms folded, occasionally making suggestions. His wariness hadn't completely faded, but a fragile optimism grew with each sentence they typed. They spelled out the basics. Caldwell Motors would allocate funds to fix key infrastructure irrigation first, then barn repairs, possibly even a new tractor prototype. In return, Jonas would act as a consultant, providing daily logs, feedback, and hosting visits from engineers and design teams. The contract included clauses allowing Jonas to end the deal if Caldwell Motors failed to uphold their commitments. By noon, both felt mentally drained. Evelyn saved the document on a USB drive, letting out a shaky breath. "I'll have to present this to the board," she said, rubbing her temples. "They might push back, but my father still holds a significant stake, and I'm certain I can persuade him. He cares about brand heritage and knows the public is turning toward sustainable solutions. Jonas nodded, trying to maintain a steady front. The weight of hope pressed on him, terrifying in its own way. When do you need to leave to do that? She hesitated. Tomorrow, if the garage finishes the car, I'll drive to the nearest airport, catch a flight to Detroit. The mention of leaving made the house feel colder. Jonas busied himself clearing the table, not wanting to dwell on the sudden pang of loss. His life had been solitary for so long. Was he already bracing for a return to that loneliness sooner later? They walked the fields again, discussing potential areas for the test track Caldwell Motors might install. Jonas explained where the ground drained poorly, where the slope risked runoff, how the north field was better for certain types of vehicles. Evelyn listened intently, taking notes on a small pad. Occasionally, they'd pause to watch the goats amble by the fence. The hush of winter lay over everything. But for the first time in a while, Jonas didn't see the landscape as a burden. He saw it as a place of possibility. That evening, with the contract hammered out, Jonas found himself inviting Evelyn to join him in the living room. She sat in Claire's old rocking chair, legs curled beneath her, while he occupied the recliner. For a time, they shared quiet conversation about life in Willow Glen, the local church events, the soldiers Jonas knew who never returned. Evelyn confessed she'd grown up in a world of chauffeur-driven cars, elite boarding schools, and business dinners. She envied Jonas for having a home anchored in generations of tradition. Eventually, the talk dwindled, replaced by a companionable silence. Outside, snow began falling again. Jonas watched the gentle drift of flakes illuminated by the porch light, feeling a softness in the air that mirrored his own guarded heart beginning to thaw. He thought of Claire, how she might have teased him for being so slow to open up to someone new. A pang of guilt and nostalgia washed over him, but it was accompanied by gratitude for the first time in years. Jonas sensed a path forward that wasn't gloom and defeat. And as he glanced at Evelyn, who was gazing at the quiet swirl of snow with the same sense of reverence, he realized that sometimes help arrived in ways one couldn't predict. A stranger turning into an ally. A corporate VP revealing a wounded idealist's heart. Tomorrow, she'd leave to fight for this contract on his behalf, and he couldn't deny that a piece of him would go with her. True to Milt's word, the necessary parts for Evelyn's car arrived by the following afternoon. Jonas offered to drive her into town, the truck rattling over patches of ice and slush. The conversation was subdued, each of them preoccupied by the enormity of what lay ahead. Evelyn was about to return to a corporate boardroom and stake her reputation on a venture few executives would readily embrace. Jonas was placing his farm, his entire life, in the hands of someone who, just days ago, had been a complete stranger. When they reached Milt's garage, the sedan was waiting, hood closed and gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Milt insisted on a final diagnostic before handing over the keys, giving Jonas and Evelyn a moment alone in the corner of the shop. She brushed imaginary dust from her coat, not meeting his gaze. If all goes well, the board will approve this pilot program. Then I'll be back within a week or two with a team of engineers. We'll start the irrigation overhaul right away if we can get the local contractors on board. Jonas nodded, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. I appreciate everything. Evelyn, honestly, I don't know how to repay you. Don't think of it as repayment, she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. Think of it as an investment. One that can benefit Caldwell Motors. Yes, but also your farm, and hopefully many more like it. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He glanced away at the clang of a wrench hitting concrete, the hum of a heater overhead. He wanted to tell her she'd already done more for him than she realized, restoring his faith in the possibility of a future. But the words stuck. Milt finally returned, wiping his hands on a rag. She's all set. Ms. Caldwell, runs smoother than ever. You should be able to get to Detroit without any hiccups. Evelyn smiled in thanks, then faced Jonas. I'll call you once I'm into the city. We'll schedule a video call or something to go over final details. He swallowed, fighting a sudden lump in his throat. Safe travels. Without warning, she stepped forward, Arms sliding around him in a brief but genuine hug, Jonas stiffened, then relaxed, returning the gesture, a warmth blossoming in his chest. Milt coughed politely, and Evelyn pulled away, cheeks flushed. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. Jonas only managed a curt nod. He watched her climb into the sedan, heart pounding as the engine purred to life. The car turned onto the snowy street, taillights growing faint in the distance. As the hum faded, the old emptiness crept back into Jonas's mind. But this time, there was a crucial difference. He had a spark of hope to cling to. Stepping outside, Jonas found the snow-laden sky strangely quiet. He let out a visible breath, recalling every detail of the past few days, the improbable breakdown, the nights by the stove, the discussions about farmland and vehicles built to last. He had no illusions that everything would be easy. The Caldwell board might reject Evelyn's proposal outright. Redwood Holdings might tighten its grip. The bank might press for foreclosure, but for the first time in a long while, Jonas Fletcher believed he wasn't fighting alone. Turning back to the truck, he rubbed a palm across the hood, thinking, "Hang in there, old friend. We might just have a future yet." Then, with a final glance down the road where Evelyn Caldwell's sedan had disappeared, Jonas climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and headed home to await whatever came next. The next week crawled by in slow increments of anxiety. Jonas kept himself busy with the usual farm work, hauling feed, patching fences, chopping firewood, anything to keep his hands occupied and his mind from wandering to worst-case scenarios. Evelyn called once to say she'd arrived safely and had scheduled a meeting with Caldwell Motors board. After that, radio silence. Winter had fully settled in, the fields glistened under a pale sun, and frost crystals clung to every fence post and tree limb. Jonas cursed the defunct irrigation lines, but took solace in the fact that, for once, the frozen ground was a blessing, no immediate floods or muddy disasters to handle. Late one afternoon, as he was returning from the barn, his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He nearly dropped the bale of hay in excitement. Evelyn's voice crackled on the other end, punctuated by background noise that sounded like city traffic. "Jonas, are you there?" He gripped the phone, heart hammering. "Yeah, I'm here. Everything okay?" She let out a laugh, half giddy, half exhausted. "We did it. The board approved the pilot program. My father backed me up, and we secured a decent budget to launch the legacy line on a small scale. Your farm is officially the first test site, assuming you're still willing." Jonas closed his eyes, relief washing over him. That's incredible news. I'm definitely willing." Evelyn laughed again, the sound of triumph in her voice. "I'll be back this weekend with some engineers to assess the irrigation situation. We're also bringing prototypes for you to evaluate. This is happening. Jonas, we're really doing it." After the call ended, Jonas leaned against the side of his barn, breathing hard. He could scarcely believe it, a second chance. A lifeline. He half expected the bubble to burst, to wake up and find himself still drowning in debt, without hope. But no, this was real. True to her word. That Saturday, 3 black Caldwell Motors SUVs rolled down Jonas's driveway. Evelyn stepped out first, leading a small team of bright-eyed engineers. Jonas greeted each person politely, though his focus kept returning to Evelyn. She'd swapped her city heels for boots, her designer coat for a sturdy jacket, yet she still carried that calm confidence he'd come to admire and, if he were honest with himself, something deeper. They spent the entire day surveying the farm. The engineers asked dozens of questions about water flow, soil composition, field layouts, and Jonas's aging machinery. They took notes and photos, measuring everything from the barn's dimensions to the exact slope of the fields. In the afternoon, they test drove 2 prototype trucks, rumbling around the muddy perimeter, checking suspension and traction. Jonas felt a strange sense of validation each time he pointed out a flaw or improvement. Evelyn, meanwhile, acted as the bridge between Jonas's practical knowledge and the engineer's technical jargon. She translated farmer speak into corporate metrics, ensuring everyone stayed on the same page. Multiple times, Jonas caught himself smiling, grateful beyond measure for her presence. He knew he still had a mortgage and taxes to tackle, but that bleak sense of impending doom was gone, replaced by the electric possibility of a future. That evening, the crew headed back to the motel in town, leaving Evelyn behind with Jonas's blessing to stay at the farmhouse. As dusk fell, the two of them stood on the porch, watching headlights vanish into the distance. "We did it," Evelyn murmured, leaning on the railing. Jonas nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders to ward off the chill. The hush of winter once more enveloped them, but now it felt peaceful, a promise rather than a curse. Over the subsequent months, Caldwell Motors moved swiftly. Crews arrived to dig trenches and install a brand new irrigation system. Jonas watched with awe as advanced pivot arms took shape, promising even water distribution across his fields once spring arrived. A prototype tractor, sleek yet sturdy, was delivered for Jonas to test, sporting sensor-driven features that could be turned off if he preferred the old-school manual operation. He was initially skeptical, but found himself grudgingly impressed by the efficiency. Engineers and reporters popped in and out of Willow Glen, shining an unusual spotlight on the once sleepy county. Local residents, who had eyed Evelyn Caldwell with suspicion at first, soon warmed to her. Not only was she bringing jobs and investment, she seemed genuinely invested in preserving the character of the community. Town meetings buzzed with discussions about the Fletcher-Caldwell project, with some folks praising Jonas for holding on to the farm, and others voicing concerns about corporate influence. But Jonas stood firm, explaining that Caldwell Motors wasn't here to exploit them. If anything, it was Redwood Holdings they needed to watch out for. It was during one such meeting, after Redwood's lawyers made an appearance to push for a land acquisition, that Evelyn quietly proposed a plan to Jonas and the townspeople. Caldwell Motors would lease an unused section of Jonas's Westfield to build a testing track. The lease income would help Jonas pay off his overdue taxes and reduce his mortgage burden. In return, Caldwell could operate the track for a set period, offering local farmers opportunities to test vehicles themselves. It was a win-win that no Redwood lawyer could effectively counter. Spring arrived in a cascade of blossoms and thawed ground. Jonas found himself enjoying the daily calls and visits from Evelyn, who stayed in the farmhouse more often than not. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, balancing business with personal connection. On quiet nights, they'd sit by the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the horizon glow with the last rays of daylight. Sometimes, Jonas caught himself thinking of Claire, wondering if she'd approve of this new bond forming in his life. A gentle peace told him she would. As the final piece of the project rolled into place, Jonas realized his debts were no longer a crushing weight. The partnership had revived his farm to the point where the harvest promised a decent profit. He even took on 2 local workers to help expand goat farming, repurposing an old stable. Evelyn's official presence in Willow Glen became less of a novelty and more of a welcome routine, especially as she openly discussed rolling out the legacy line to other rural regions. One evening, after a long day testing the new equipment, Jonas and Evelyn strolled through the pasture. The sky was a tapestry of gold and violet, the air warm with hints of summer. Pausing by a fence, Evelyn turned to him, a tremor in her voice. "There's one more thing I've been meaning to ask," she said. Her gaze flicked to the distant barns, the farm dog barking somewhere, the outline of the newly installed irrigation pivot. Jonas tilted his head, heart pounding. He could sense the significance in her tone. Slowly, Evelyn reached into her pocket and produced a small velvet box. "You saved me when I was stranded," she whispered, eyes brimming with emotion. "Then you let me into your life, your farm, your world. Now I want us to build a new legacy together, both professionally and personally." She opened the box to reveal a modest band with a single diamond. "Marry me. Jonas Fletcher." He felt tears burn in his eyes. In all his years, through war, love, and devastating loss, he'd never imagined a second chance like this. He nodded, voice choked. "Yes," he managed, wrapping her in a tender embrace. Overhead, the twilight sky glowed, and the fields shimmered with promise. Together they would write a new chapter, forging a bond that honored the past but faced the future with hope. They stood there farmer and heiress, sealing an unlikely union in the heart of Willow Glen County as the final ribbons of daylight faded into a gentle night. And in that quiet moment, Jonas knew that every broken pipe, every heartbreak, every lonely prayer had led him here to a life rebuilt not just on the fertile earth, but on the steadfast power of love. In the end, Jonas Fletcher proved that courage isn't just found on distant battlefields, but also in the heartland farms of America. He and Evelyn Harrington showed us that sometimes the greatest riches are measured not in wealth, but in integrity, compassion, and love worth fighting for. Their journey reminds us that it's never too late to stand up against corruption, save our cherished traditions, and build a legacy that honors our roots. What would you have done in Jonas's shoes? Could you see yourself taking on corporate giants to protect your family's heritage? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about the values that made this nation great. And if you enjoyed this powerful story of bravery and redemption, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell icon, and stay tuned for more unforgettable tales right here on our channel.